Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Big Boys Table, episode 39, Consumertism. Hi.
Tism.
Yeah. You.
Tism. You. Tism. You. Tism.
So, figured we wanted to talk a bit about a couple of different things, one of which I actually brought up in my latest Dad Caw, which is my vlog series. You got Coffee Hour, I got Dad Caw.
Dad Caw.
So, that's what I'm talking about. Anyway, we during that one, I was responding to a question from Fagudo, who's got fag in the name, so you know he's cool.
I thought it was Fag-Uto. That's how I renamed it.
I should read it as
Fag-Uto.
Fag you too. So
Fag-Uto.
Yeah, it's like Naruto's arch nemesis. So that's my man. Anyway,
I always thought it was a playoff of Fag. This is blowing my world, to be honest.
I call him. I kind of. It's like if you've ever heard me call somebody Igor, it's because it's Igor. It's like you're getting away with something there. So
you have the N-word pass, man. You fought Shaggy for it.
Exactly.
And Shrek.
We fought them all. We're here to talk about. We'll spin off this particular discussion point, but one of the things that was discussed in that Dad Call was talking about what Fagudo asked me about, which is crow pilling and red pilling people on actually being real human beings and not consumers, basically. What are you laughing at? You don't understand crow pilling?
I still find it funny that you call it crow pilling.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be the name of the series of videos that I produce for when I do my Half-Life video essay. I'm going to call it Half-Life Crow Pilled. It'll be great.
It gives me a mental image. If you just go in your trash can, just grab a crow, just swallow the whole crow.
Yeah.
It goes cawing all the way down your throat as it wriggles around. Got that genuine taste of plastic and oil as it slides down your throat, wiggling.
Yeah, well, deep within that pill that you took that came in the form of a crow is an elixir that will awaken you from your fever dream that is reality.
Will it awaken your chakras?
Yeah. It'll light you up, man, like a Christmas tree.
Oh.
A crow tree.
I sure hope not. I'm really flammable.
So, basically, the main gist of it, the actual useful connotations that come from this whole thing are, well, as a developer, you start to become aware of standards and the fact that if you're making a game, you need to be making a game and not Half-Life, basically. So, what do you want to do then? Well, we've already gone over that in excruciating detail, and we've explained a bunch of different concepts that most people don't get or otherwise don't really get talked about, and that's great. But what about when you're dealing with people who are just average consumers? You know, what role can your commentary really provide for them? You know, this actually stretches that across a couple of different things, a couple of different areas. Because if you look at even the comment section of some of my YouTube videos, not just like the Black Mesa ones, which are obviously more popular, but there's people who've commented on, custom content reviews, which is obviously very niche, let alone custom content in general is very, very niche. And then you consider somebody watching a review for a campaign where I just go through and I deconstruct it. And then that's primarily used for other developers in the space so that they can look at some of the projects that, whether or not they had any held any esteem, these projects, they could still look at my take of it and maybe that can help inform their own design decisions as content creators in the same space. But looking away from that and trying to understand how an average Joe would look at it, like just an average player of custom content, I think you can gather some information that can be useful to understanding this position, because the reason why I don't think it's very useful, that is my position, it's not very useful for the average consumer to be crow-pilled, is the reason being is they don't have much that they can do after they reach these realizations. Now, in a sense, you should only really, I think, patronize something, give your patronage to a particular product or an industry if it is worthy of that. But people are going to do whatever they're going to do anyway. And what does it really help them to understand or find out on a philosophical level and also on a utilitarian level, the fact that everything that they have liked is actually garbage, and that there's no hope for any of it to get better, and that there's nothing that they can do when they're armed with this knowledge. They can't go and play other games unless that it happens to fall in the right genre. Like, they can play the old Counter-Strike shit and they can play the old StarCraft shit if they like multiplayer games, and they don't mind having to deal with a very, very niche community, because StarCraft Remastered killed the fucking game. And if you have any standards in software, forget about gaming, you're not going to play Remaster because of all of the problems that it has with performance. And Counter-Strike Global Offensive is pretty much in the same boat. You're making very similar concessions when you play that instead of 1.6 or one of the older versions like 1.3 and so 3. And so you basically have to go through that gamut and figure out what you actually want to do. And if you're capable or willing to set aside your dislike for small communities or your distaste for anything that is a single player game, because there's pretty much no good single player content out there, then yeah, it can be useful for you. But for most people, I think the pros will outweigh the cons. I mean, the opposite, the cons will outweigh the pros. That you'll be able to find you'll be able to find some joy, even if it's in a perfect world. You wouldn't be finding that joy from shitty content. You'll be able to find some of that regardless. With this shitty content that you won't be able to find once you are crow-pilled. So where does the utility of it arise? Like, where do you get that
crow-pilled?
Crow-pilled. So,
I can't believe you started calling it crow-pilled.
Hell yeah, man.
Oh, fuck. Well, the way I always saw it is that, like I ranted about, because I always wake up, I always have to yell about something.
Yeah.
Like, man, I had the wording in my head and then I lost it immediately. Crow-pilled. It's, like, for the average Joe, like, what are they going to get out of it? Really, the limit is always going to be, like, what they want out of it. Like, that's why I've always said that demonstration is the most powerful form of review. Because, like pretty much all videos out there are basically people projecting things onto you that are saying, oh, this movie was good because X or Y, or this was shitty because X or Y. They might show like some clips or demos of it. But when you pair something with a review, you always have that objective overview that comes with it that shows, this is how you reach this conclusion. And then in the review process, you maybe try to disseminate what has happened and try to break down, well, this was bad because of this, and this was good because of this. This is X, third part of the series for the third franchise of the developer's third offshoot. And this many things happened in this order, and, this is what they learned, and this is what they didn't learn, and 3. And we have all the content to go with that, so we can't have our argument say, well, this is wrong because X and Y, unless, for example, you're pulling out exterior information that for some reason turns out to be incorrect. Like, for example, whenever I make some technical observations, this is usually based mostly on guesswork and hearsay, and sometimes somebody will tell me, they'll correct something and be like, well, this is because of X, Y, and then maybe I address it later on or something like that. Well, for the most part, you're going from an observation, going from a demonstration. So, taking, for example, Half-Life. Like, there's really no way you can argue in Half-Life's favor actually having looked at it. I just get the impression that the vast majority of people I've seen commenting, trying to defend Half-Life, aren't really gamers. They aren't people who play games. They aren't people who especially play, like, shooters and stuff. They just kind of are like, Half-Life was popular. Like, there was that one guy who was like, Minecraft was popular, so Half-Life is good. And like you just get like really asinine shit like that because you've basically offended them by telling them that either their childhood fantasy was wrong or, their buying decisions were wrong and it makes them wrong and people can't stand being wrong. So they'll just try to come up with any kind of excuse, any kind of straw man to attack other than, what is directly in front of them.
Right.
So really, like, when you think about that, what happened actually before you reached that particular interaction is these people walked into the review looking for validation, but instead you presented something that was invalidation, and then they treated that as a personal attack. So that is why they start like trying to bring up straw men and stuff like that, rather than really tackling the root of the issue, which is, you know, right in front of them. And you know, the same can be said for those really awful fan campaigns you've played that people get butthurt over, even though they're really awful. I would imagine that most of the developers out there probably recognize that their work is absolutely terrible. They may hype it otherwise, but most people deep down, you know, once you spend however many hours with something, regardless of how skilled you are, you sort of understand where your shortcomings are and where your advantages are. And you always just subconsciously understand that, well, this probably wasn't as good as it could have been, as it should have been, as it would have been, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I always feel like there's like that massive disconnect there. And I have seen this in the case for my work too, where people have tried to defend things that they really shouldn't have been defending that I knew otherwise. And even sometimes I even had to, you know, speak up myself to correct them, to say, no, this is actually 3. And there is that disconnect. So that is why, you know, when you think about the average Joe, like I'm in several Discord servers still. I left most of them, but I'm still in some of them. And one of them is Discord. And Discord is run by Mountain Dew. And he's popular by extent largely because of like Legacy videos and sort of stuff like that. He's a video editor. He's a video creator. And he's got quite a sizable chunk of people following him. He's big. He's huge. And then there's another server, which is run by a virtual singer that, again, very big, you know, well over 200,000 subs. And in both of these groups of people, you have, you know, like several different shades. Like in the one server, it is basically like they're hilarious. They're just the racism is just great. It's fantastic. It's just a wonderful, you know, carefree atmosphere. But in Mountain Dew server, you know, it's very Tumblr in many respects. So like there's very different things. But regardless of like the kinds of people that are in there, like, you know, like what kind of humor they have, what kind of content they circulate around. One thing I noticed with pretty much all of them is that none of them are really into the analytical stuff. None of them are really into, you know, taking stuff apart. So say, for example, in the one server, we have people who play these phone games that I've been messing around with, like Azur Lane and stuff like that. And the English localization for this game is absolutely horrendous. And they don't quality assurance anything. The testing is terrible. And the community surrounding the English game is also absolutely terrible and creepy. And no short amount of time goes to making fun of them, period. And we go on a Mountain Dew server, and it's sort of similar. Like, people make fun of, like, the liberals on, you know, Twitter and stuff like that. Like, they have, like, a rule against political discussions, so it's never really gone too in-depth. But there's a lot of, like making fun of, you know, the shitty sites like Reset Era and stuff like that.
Of course.
So you have, like, those sort of communal things, this communal hatred for that sort of, you know, thing. But nobody really, like, goes into it. Nobody, like, really goes into in-depth. So, like, you know, say, for example, the performance for Azur Lane in particular has gone downhill a lot. And everybody's noticed it's gone downhill, even on people with newer hardware and even people emulating. But nobody really breaks down why. Nobody really gets into why. And the core of the problem is, of course, you know, Unity is shit. And the developers don't give a shit. And you don't really have that exposure to people saying, well, maybe there should be some kind of pressure for people to actually make their games perform correctly. Usually what ends up happening is someone says, well, I guess I need a new phone or something like that to run it better. Like, there really isn't like that demand, or even a visible demand, or even like an awareness that this is actually not a problem with your phone. The average phone has such crazy fucking processing power behind it. It's crazy. In the palm of your hand, you have what would have been considered even just 10 years ago a supercomputer. Like, my tablet is like 5-6 years old right now, and I think it's running on an i5 or something like that. Like, the processing power behind it, yes, it's mobile architecture and it's not very good, but the raw stats and stuff behind it is, this kind of stuff would have costed you easily like $1,000 or more, you know, back when I bought my system back in like 2009. And I have this on the palm of your hand, and it cannot run something even comparable to Metal Slug, which was like 80s or something like that, arcade. Like, it's fucking nuts. how inefficient the modern game is, even in mobile. And you think in mobile, performance is key because you're running on phones, because you're running on mobile architecture. But everybody runs on Unity, and Unity is shit, and nobody researches how to make stuff perform well. Fate Grand Order, I've heard they don't actually know how to delete data from that game. So every single event, the client just grows larger and larger and larger, all the way up to right now, where I think the JP client is somewhere around 12, 13 gigabytes, which is fucking enormous, considering phones don't typically let you install games on SIM cards. You have to install an internal storage, and most of them don't have that much internal storage. So nobody like starts asking the big questions like, why don't you let us install things on SIM cards? Why is everything so locked down? Why do I have to use an emulator or something like that to, root the phone and get access to basic functionality? Like, there is no demand at the core consumer level to even ask the questions why. Before we even get into what you would consider as... I can't believe I'm saying crow pilling. Holy fuck. What have you done? But like, even before you even get to the point where you start asking the consumer to really like open their eyes and start looking at the actual products, the actual platforms that they're on, there is nothing. There's not even like the awareness. Like, even people who I would consider like above the crowd in terms of like, their standards and stuff like that, they're just not even aware where to point their criticisms for this. They're not aware where to direct their misgivings, much less reaching the point where they make purchasing decisions or posts or anything based on this. Most people, because they're so like disenfranchised by the general populace, they choose just to isolate themselves and then just stick amongst their own groups, which is, generally speaking, probably the more healthy thing to do. Every single time I've ever seen any of these groups of people connect to one another, it always results in conflict. So it usually, like, the core theme of things is that you really can't convince somebody of anything, and you shouldn't really like walk into interactions intending to convince something of something, intending to change their opinions of something, especially on the internet. Debates are a meme, and only really like college liberal people who will never actually get a real job put any value into debates, especially on the internet. But that's what you see on Twitter and Facebook, is debating. Especially on Facebook, religious debating is apparently the in thing between soccer moms. Guess what PCM does these days, apparently? It's just debate religion on Facebook. The absolute peak of culture.
Of course.
But the thing is you don't get anywhere. Like, it doesn't matter what the subject is, gaming, religion, or whatever. I was in another server for a while. There was a religion channel because for some reason some people believe in sky fairies still. And every now and then somebody would pop in and they'd start arguing with some other guy. And this other guy was amazing because he was like a half troll, like a very dedicated troll. And they would just go at it day after day after day after day, arguing about this like really fine asinine shit about, like, I don't remember because it's too long ago, but like the religion debating was really hard to follow. I mean, political debating is hard to follow too, but religion's even more crazy because you've got two people arguing about the same fucking source material that is just fan fiction, and they argue about it for just hours and hours and hours, and they never convince each other of anything. They never will. Because immediately from the get-go, they've already planted their feet in the ground and they say, I'm right, you're wrong, that's it. And arguing about it just plants their feet in further. So when you ask, like, how do you even approach such a thing as the average Joe? You have to realize right off the bat that the average Joe is the guy who won't ever actually engage in one of those kinds of things to begin with. He's not even open to the whole idea that, the information that he contains, his perception about something can be changed, should be changed, would be changed. He's never even approached the idea that something like, for example, how he purchases or consumes products is really even something that could be debated to begin with. He's not really there. So, Faguto, or Fagotron, or whatever you want to pronounce his name as, he mentioned something in the server, something like visionaries changing gaming or something like that. And I obviously don't have full context of all this stuff, but I know it's similar to what you're mentioning about crow pilling and making people have standards and stuff like that, is you have to really, I think, work off of that demonstration arm first. Like, there was a lot of people who showed up when I made those educational videos, even though they're not very educational. They are a fucking mess. It's just me dicking around in Unreal 4 trying to explain certain things. But the little bit of demonstrations and explaining how things are going on under the hood, it opens up a lot. It opens up a lot. Like the physics things. Like, every single person knows, average Joe or otherwise, that physics is a meme. And it has only gotten worse in games as time's gone on. Every single person you find, every single casual, gets a kick out of fucked ass physics in games. Whether it be like those hysterical football games where the players just kind of like melt into meth territory, or shit like GTA where you hit a corner in a certain way and you enter the atmosphere. Everybody gets a kick out of these. That's why even on Skyrim stuff, you always see comments like, I always find bugs in games funny. Even though the bugs are as a result of incompetence, you've reached that connection with the average Joe is that games are buggy and bugs are funny. So the demonstration arm, especially for the educational series, was to try to explain why some of those bugs happen and how some of those bugs happen, and then you can start talking about things like addressing how to actually fix those bugs. And then when you talk about how easy it is to actually fix those bugs, then you turn around and say, so why didn't the developer fix this? So this isn't public right now, but I'm actually making a video series on Sonic 2006. And Sonic 2006 is widely regarded by the vast majority of people, casuals alike, to be one of the worst games. That's at least one of the worst Sonic games that's ever been made. Some people are conflicted about Shadow the Hedgehog versus Sonic 2006, but Shadow may be bad, but it's not quite this bad. So Sonic 2006 is a game that you expect to be really like unfair and lame, but it's also like insanely buggy, insanely buggy. So somebody I know did a stream playthrough for this and streamed it to me and HKS and other people. And I have all the recordings of her entire run, minus the video she still needs to send me. So what I was doing is I was disseminating this and going through as many point-by-point cases as I could about things that are wrong. You know, like a lot of the stuff you don't need to explain. Things like unfair collision or stuff like that, or weird like invulnerability or odd behavior right on screen. I can explain some things. Like, for example, there's periods where you're playing as Silver and you use support barriers on buildings as springboards. And when you do this, what happens is the animations are fucked beyond words. Like the thing you're jumping off of goes up into the screen. You don't even move. It goes back down. Your character's hardly moving. It's like flailing along. Every frame, it's in like a different fucking dimension. Shit's fucked up. So one of the things I do is I did a little recording where I hopped into 3ds Max and I animated this exact same thing in a span of about like 10 seconds. So like I did that and people really like that. My internal viewers really like that because like it's a lot of stuff that people know, but when you actually like just put it right out there, right in front of them and just show them and say, this is how easy this is to do. And a multi-billion dollar corporation like Sega, who's made, you know, hundreds of games by this point, still couldn't do it, or they didn't care enough to do it, or whatever excuse you want to throw in that direction. Like, it really just highlights the insanity. And that's at a level anybody can understand. That's at a level everybody can understand. And the average Joe, if he's watching this presentation and has gotten as far and has already stated, you know, I'm interested in this content for whatever reason because of the subject material, the bugs, primarily speaking, the silliness. And now we explain another dimension of the silliness. We kind of peel away the layer and say, hey, this is how you actually do this correctly, even at a very basic level. We don't explain 3ds Max. We just show, you know, it's literally just drag and drop, put in some hotkeys, and do some rotations, and you're done. That's it. That is actually literally how simple it is. And we don't get into any of the complicated stuff. We don't ask people to, you know, we don't go up and say, you guys shouldn't be buying this. You should have some standards. We just go up and show them and say, this product is garbage, and this is why it's garbage, and this is what it takes to do it correctly. You're paying money for this. People pay money for this. I like to bring up sales figures a lot for this because a lot of people rag on these games and say they were terrible games, and then they sold millions and millions and millions of copies. I really like to highlight that contrast, like especially with stuff like StarCraft 2 and Diablo 3. Those are games that basically anybody who really has any sense of standards can agree is absolutely terrible, but they were all stunning successes. I like to draw up those correlations because they all make the exact same mistakes. They're all just as bad as Sonic 2006 at every step of the way, and people paid more for them just because Blizzard has a logo on it. So I like to I can get into technical stuff, but I really like when we look at the video productions, keeping it simple for the average Joe. We aren't necessarily trying to appeal to the average Joe, but if the average Joe wants to watch it, having those connections really can go a long way to really exposing the kind of content to the average Joe. And then if he's interested, he can really pay attention to what's going on, and then he'll learn a few things.
And I think that's pretty much the best that you can hope for, is that the average consumer in this particular case would be interested in learning it all. That's another reason why you can't really try to explain the concept. Like at some point I will have a whole a by design-esque video or a podcast-esque video on what even crow pilling means, because obviously just hearing it is going to be confusing and hilarious. But that's it. So I got to make a video that explains the concept, and then have a couple of video essays that go through and basically do what you were talking about with Sonic 06, but doing so in a way where I'm not just looking at the core game. I'm also responding to people who have been widely regarded as respectable critics or respectable game journalists or whatever you want to call that. And not just the meme game journalist or the meme critic, but somebody who's actually people, basically finding a Half-Life fan and saying, what is your, top couple of reviews or pieces made on Half-Life that celebrate the game and make a good argument for the game being good, or the game even being a game, and basically deconstructing those, which is a very different approach than just taking a look at the game itself, although I'm sure I'll have to at various points.
I like to deconstruct interviews in particular.
Right, yeah. Interviews with the developers would be useful as well. I was thinking they made a developer commentary for Half-Life 2 that I was thinking of recording as an uncommentated playthrough of the game with that enabled, so that I could just get footage of it. Somebody's probably already done that at the very least, so I might be able to just take their footage and use that instead of having to play through the fucking game again. That would be terrible. But
have you tried to do the speed run? You could try to do a speed run with that.
With
flying around on physics objects.
Well, did you know I already did that in a well, it wasn't physics objects, but I was reverse bee hopping, and I was achieving light speed as just a man in a section that was meant to be completed as in a vehicle. I went through it way faster than the vehicle would have let me.
Very good engine, by the way.
Yeah, excellent engine. Black Mesa was made in it, so it's pretty good.
Yep, very good.
But at the end of the day, when I was looking, sitting down the Black Mesa product that thankfully I did not pay for, but I weep for Don, who paid for it all. Poor guy. Paid for it 3 times over now, I guess. I weep for him. 3.
Is he the StarCraft or the Warcraft Reforged guy? Buying a copy every day.
No.
Just throwing his money away.
That would be a real that would be a revelation if we found out it was the same guy. Holy shit. Don't scare me like that.
There can't be too many people throwing away their money like that.
Yeah, not.
I say that as straight-laced as possible.
Yeah, I'm amazed you kept it together. So, you could say that, but you can't say crow-pilled? Come the fuck on, dude.
Hey, man, I just got through talking about how fucking Sonic 2006 was really, really successful.
Yeah, that's true. It was financially successful. Well, that's that other thing we could probably talk about.
Successful.
If we were to actually get some of these people on who made these fucking quote-unquote products, that how do you even sleep at night? Not necessarily a super aggressive interview, because who knows what the fuck they actually had. I'd just be interested to ask them questions about what was the process like, but also how do you consider the game, considering it was a huge financial success, but very clearly a creatively bankrupt product? No success was had in that regard at all. I wonder what the fuck goes through their heads.
Well, most people only view popularity as a margin for success. A lot of people, I guess, must be Hitler fans, and the Trump hate must be really overblown because, for so many people, popularity is everything. It's really actually quite disgusting.
Well, a lot of the times you'll also get the fallacy of like, so this happens a lot in the Counter-Strike space, which I follow somewhat regularly when I have the time to anyway. I'll watch some esports. There's a downtime right now anyway, so there's not too many tournaments happening. But a lot of the times the analysts, especially if they were not professional games or professional gamers in that space, like Thorin was never a professional player in any context, and Richard Lewis, the same deal. So those two in particular have very controversial opinions, but you'll also get a lot of people saying that they shouldn't even be allowed to be analysts because they were never players. They never actually played the game. So how can they criticize professional players?
Yeah.
It's the same thing as like, you know, a movie critic being yelled at for not actually directing a movie, or somebody like you or I being yelled at because we never made games. Although we're a little bit closer in that regard, I guess, because all game developers are modders, which is another thing that we should probably touch on in this podcast later on, because I still can't.
I've actually done real game development now, though, so you can't even say that about me anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty epic. So it's just crazy to me that is still even consider, like, even anybody even gives that argument the light of day in their own head before typing out an angry Reddit post. So I really don't get that. Is like, how do you imagine that the only people that can criticize something, like, in the same hand, you must imagine then that the only people who could properly provide praise and review something at all, critical or not. You know, I mean, I think an element of critical commentary tends to be also shedding light on the positives that maybe most people wouldn't see, like, or exposing, like you were talking about it, you know, exposing how bad Sonic 06 is. But if Sonic 06 or some other game did the same concept very well and did it properly, you know, that's something that sometimes gets, you know, sort of swept under the rug or you know, just not noticed as much. So I feel like that could also be an element of critical commentary, even if it's not critical in the sense of reviewing.
Castlevania Symphony of Night and Rondo of Blood. Like, there's a lot of things that really surprised me about Symphony of Night in particular that I think a lot of people who watch my videos normally would not have taken to light. So I always try to make a balance. Like, that's the part about being objective, right?
Of course,
You try to address everything as neutrally as possible. It's not about bringing out just negatives and stuff. It's about bringing out, you know, everything that you really can.
Yeah, but if you've bought the line of thinking that only game developers can be critics of games because they're the only people who have the prior experience necessary to delve into that criticism, then you have to also treat every other person who's ever praised a game for something with the same way. And obviously, if you're thinking that way, odds are you yourself have praised a game, so you're already hypocritical. So it doesn't even follow there. It doesn't bear out in that respect. So I really don't get the people who go through with that kind of line of thinking. I haven't figured out how they've thought about that. But that's the other thing, is like, these people who hold these hypocritical or self-defeating concepts and they swear by them, or that this is their line of thinking. This is like the average person's line of thinking. And I'm not necessarily claiming that this particular example is, but take anything that is a fallacy, that is fallacious in an argumentative level, like on a base level, but is also very common. And you'll come to the realization, I think, rather quickly, that odds are they didn't think about that, because if they did think about that, they would not keep it. So they've kept it, but only on the basis of not really critically examining it and not being interested in critically examining it or having somebody else explain why it's bad and taking it away from there. You know, it's just like the people who think Half-Life is good, they kept that supposition or belief or whatever you want to call it without actually critically examining that supposition. And when confronted with somebody who says something to the contrary, like my review with Black Mesa, especially, which got a lot of action for some reason, probably because people were looking at it. I had just played it at the time where the DLC was released, so that's probably had something to do with it. But, you know, these people are coming in, like you said, with looking for validation of their opinion that was lazily copy pasted from somebody else, probably without them really considering it, and that it spread mimetically as opposed to naturally and organically based on them actually looking at the content and coming to their own conclusions. It was almost like, you know, they were already told that it was a great game and that's why they should check it out, as opposed to you should check out this game because of X, Y, or Z actual content associated with it. They were just told that it was good, and that was their guiding supposition going into it. I mean, consider it like
thought I see a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider something like, if I told you to check out a movie and I said this is a great movie and that's all I gave you, then maybe you would be more inclined to think, you know, obviously people like us tend to be a bit more critical in our thought, but we might be more inclined to look at it. Like I actually did recommend you a movie a long time ago. It's called 12 Angry Men. I thought you might like that because that's 3 4s. Mm-hmm. But yeah,
that was an interesting movie.
Yeah, but like, if I just say it's a great movie, which is probably the lazy way that I recommended it to you back then, because that was many, many years ago, you know, without really giving you any context, it doesn't really tell you why I think it's great. It just tells you that it is great. And so even on the person who's recommending it, they're not really doing any critical thinking in their recommendation. They're not giving you any argumentation for why they think the movie is great. They don't need to spoil the movie to do this, by the way. All they need to do is say it's great because it has some interesting characters or it has some interesting concepts, or they think it can be as vague as they want, but they can at least give you some guidance for why they think it's great, and then you can decide for yourself when you go and watch it.
The only time that really becomes valuable is if you understand that person enough to know why they might think it's great.
Right.
But then you really have to start reading between the lines, which really shouldn't be necessary.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be the only way that we're just flatly saying this is a great thing, check it out, is would be interesting at all. So at that point, you can only hope that because you think that the person has high standards, that their lazy recommendation of it's great, check it out is worthwhile for that reason. So I myself have attempted to be better at that anyway, and not do that lazy thing. But I just feel like, most people just have that mapped onto their brain already. They have their opinion mapped on by other people's recommendations or people they trust or friends or whatever. They take their they take their opinion, or they take the opinion of critics that they read like blurbs of like 10 out of 10 IGN LOL or whatever. And like it's crazy how this is spreading mimetically as opposed to spreading based on word of mouth. But like it is word of mouth in a sense, but it's not. It's like marketing word of mouth. It's not really the same thing. So there's just a whole other layer of sickness that spreads with that. And if people are already...
There's a lot of sickness underneath the hood, too. Like, it's information control, like all the shills, the websites that delete negative comments and stuff like that, upvoting and downvoting, like the echo chamber effect. It's not just that, like, somebody makes a statement and it gets copycatted. It's that the entire environment is designed to echo that statement as much as possible because a whole bunch of people stand to benefit from it being echoed.
Right. And then you also have to consider, like, when you're already thinking that this is how things are, because this is how most of the coverage within the games industry is, and probably just products in general, I would argue, but especially the games industry suffers from this problem. I feel like if you take a step away from that and you consider like what the average person must be thinking.
Well, think about it this way.
This
is another aspect to consider it.
Yeah.
Like, right now, the vast majority of people who do reviews and stuff do it for money, right? So, of course, you have sites like IGN and stuff like that who are paid by the developers to give them positive reviews. Now, that's an easy one, but the vast majority of people won't actually use IGN. They'll probably refer to their favorite personality on YouTube. But this is just as bad because the vast majority of your favorite personalities on YouTube are in it for the money and only the money. Now, what generates the most amount of buzz? Validation, positivity. That's going to always generate more traffic and more interest than negativity. And most people view criticism by nature as negative. That's one of the reasons why no reviewers will ever go into anything negative at all. And furthermore, why nobody will ever go into technical stuff at all. It's always going to be flowery. It's always going to be promoting rather than demoting, unless they didn't get paid and they feel spiteful about something. You might see that sometimes, but it's pretty rare. I've seen it a couple of times, but it's pretty rare. There are some flip sides to this, like say for example like angry video game nerd or something like that. He's got his personality, and his personality is all around being angry and stuff like that. So that's how he makes it. But the vast majority of people, especially reviewers, actual reviewers, and not personalities, meme reviewers, they're going to be there just exclusively to push products to be positive. And you will also see this I noticed this on Steam as well. The curators that always get recommended only recommend stuff positively. They always give like 2 or 3 lines that's just like, this is a great game, wow, and then that's it. And they're at the top. They're suggested at the top because it's just a pyramid of shilling. But these people have to do that if they want to make their living off of YouTube, because if they were to do something critically, they wouldn't get as much traffic. They'd actually lose money. They have the incentive right off the bat to not actually address things critically at all. By any stretch of the imagination. They have no incentive to actually educate themselves, much less their viewer base. The entire system is designed to fight against that.
Well, the other consideration here is that it stands in stark contrast to the way that like political or lifestyle publications have made their money lately, which is obviously through hate clicks. That stuff wouldn't last in the games industry because, I mean, it has lasted in a sense where it's like op-eds about how gamers are horrible.
Kotaku lives off of that.
Kotaku does that all the time. Polygon as well, probably. But, outside of those two publications, you don't really see that much from actual YouTube, journalists or game reviewers or whatever you want to call them. You're not really going to see that same style of hate click farming, fear mongering shit or hate mongering shit or whatever. You're not going to see the same kind of material. So like generally the reason why the critical and technical minded people are they're never really at the top of the recommendations is because people are expressly not interested in it. And that is a vicious cycle of the industry, as talked about before, where you get these opinions mapped onto you by critics and friends and other people's recommendations and your favorite YouTube personality. And it does feed into itself, because if it were again, just like if the average gamer was demanding quality, the average game would have to be quality in order to succeed financially. The same thing is true for the game reviewers. If the average YouTube viewer who didn't have ad block on for some psychotic reason or donated to him on Patreon gave him some if they gave them the reviewers flack and said, you're not being critical, you should be critical about this, you should be honest, and you should not be so surface level. If that were the case, then the reviewers would also have to improve. And so it is all cyclical and all linked, unfortunately, because there's no way that you're going to get mainstream-esque, zeitgeist-esque content or commentary that is ever anywhere close to as critical as Mesker or myself. You're just not going to get that out of the average person, generally speaking. I mean, usually they're not technically minded when they do it anyway, if they do it at all. And when it is there, it's very sparing, I think. Like, for example...
there's a lot of misconception about it, too.
Okay, go ahead.
Like, people automatically assume because you're critical, you're just there to hate on something.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one, because they assume that if you don't like... their favorite game, then you just don't like games, and why are you reviewing games? Which is a classic thing. Like, if you don't like Half-Life, you don't like games. I talked about that before. It's just a sick take. It's usually the opposite. People are critical generally because they some people do just have an axe to grind with life in general, and they will just be spiteful people, but most of the time that's not the only thing that they're going after. Most of the time anybody who's critical is doing so from an honest place, I would say. Or I can't really speak for everybody, I guess, but when I'm critical about something, it's because I actually give a shit about the content that I'm playing, or I want the content that I'm playing to be higher quality, or any other number of things. Like, fill in your own story there, but it's pretty much one of those two things. It's because I actually do think that games can be really good and really fun and really engaging and really challenging. And they're none of those things 99.999% of the time. None of the content that I play is really can be called content to begin with. It's kind of insulting to call it content, but you have to call it content because there's really no other word. The software that we're running, generally speaking, when it comes to games, is very, very poor in its quality, and that's not something that most people talk about, because that does give you the impression that if you're saying that stuff, you don't like games. But the reason why I don't like the games that I am playing is not because I don't like games as a medium, or I don't think that it can be great or I can produce great things. It's just that the industry that we're in is only really supportive of content that is terrible. It's supportive of all kinds of content in terms of quality, but it's mostly supportive of content that has all of the budget put into marketing and not really any of the budget put into making games good, because you don't really need to make your game good if you can just convince people that it's good before they've even played it, which is what we were talking about before. So I think it is really unfortunately, that's what I was talking about. But when I was talking about it being inevitable, almost it just being cyclical, unless you get in enough of people's heads to pull away from the mass consumer mob that is the average game consumer, like them all totaled up together, you're not going to be able to enact any meaningful change on the industry. And that should never be your expectation. Like you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, that's not really what you're trying to do. Is you're not trying to appeal to the average Joe. You're not trying to get them to convince them of anything necessarily. You're just demonstrating, here's something that's fucked up. Here's what it would take to fix it. Why couldn't they do that? Like you're demonstrating a problem and then a solution and then asking a question in this 3-step guide to free yourself. Yep. And I was going to give one example of a YouTuber that does tend to be a little bit more critical and is actually a bit bigger than I would expect him to be as a result. But Upper Echelon Gamers is his tag, and he's actually not that bad when it comes to reviewing stuff for being bad, and he does take to task the same people that other like Reset Era and all this other shit. He takes them all to task as well. The problem with his commentary usually is that he attacks things from not despite his handle. It's not what he praises about games tends to not be the whole picture. Like that walking simulator game, that Amazon delivery simulator game, Death Stranding. I don't know if you've heard anything about it. It was made by the Metal Gear Solid developers, so it's obviously not a very promising off the bat. But it's like most of the gameplay that I've seen of it, and again, I could be wrong about the vast majority of the gameplay might be something else, but it's you running around trying to deliver boxes. And that's it. I mean, that's all I've seen. Like, I don't even know if you get weapons or you get to shoot things. Like, there's things that try to attack you. There's like alien organisms. There's acid rain, and there's raiders or scavengers or something. And every time one of them shows up, there's a cutscene that plays of them running up. And then if the raiders are running away for some reason, then the cutscene shows them running away. And then you get some dialogue event where some guy in your ear is like radioing you or whatever. He's like, "Hey, looks like they aren't dumb enough to mess with whatever alien is out here." You know, some dumb shit. Like, it's just overloading you with just a bunch of junk that has nothing to do with actual gameplay. And then you get back to your gameplay and it's just running around or slowly waddling around trying to put boxes together. So I mean, like just everything about that turned me off completely. And the people who find this kind of simulator gameplay where you're literally running around delivering packages interesting aren't really in it for gameplay. They're in it for like some sort of weird VR-esque immersion or something. Like, it's not what you would look for a game. You know what I mean? Obviously, games can be several things. Like, interactive software can be several things, but that is not a game. Like, that's the thing. Is like a game needs to have not only a goal, like those fucking Black Mesa commenters we're talking about. It doesn't just have to have a goal. It needs to engage you, the player, in a variety of things.
Even like the fucking truck and train simulators have more than that.
Right.
Because they're just simulating you driving. Like, you still have to drive something.
Well,
and yeah, sometimes the train simulators do send your trains into the atmosphere too.
Yeah, that's true. Feet.
There's like more going on there than just fucking walking around. Holy shit! Like, the walking simulator fad is just so bizarre.
Well, that's like a triple A, like all this polished, rounded corner shit in that game too. Is like the game definitely, very obviously had a budget to it, and it was very clearly misused in many respects, but. Like,
what is wrong with people?
I don't understand why that game. That's another one of those games where you could make a YouTube compilation. Dude, you could make a YouTube compilation of Death Stranding all cutscenes, and I think it was like 10 hours or something. Hold on, let me look at that.
Oh my god! So, I can understand 10 hours of cutscenes if you had like 10,000 hours of gameplay, but I haven't heard any gameplay now. This crazy shit. Oh my god. Like, why do people, like, I can understand if like one developer has like some fucking like cocaine trip and he's like, I gotta make this game because I don't know, you just gotta make it. But like, you get like all the outsourced companies, all the random fucking people yanked off the street, your best friend's sister, your wife, your breastfeeding, your free bleeding, you get all this other shit on board, and now you've got an army making this thing that isn't even a game. Like, what do they tell themselves to get through it?
I don't know.
Like, at what point do you feel like maybe they just lost sight of what they're doing and don't care anymore? Are they just in it because this
game director, this Hideo Kojima guy, is responsible for Metal Gear Solid, which turned from a game to a movie, like over its, as far as I understand, its entire history was just a bunch of movies and then QTEs and Revengeance. You played Revengeance,
well,
so you already know.
There was earlier Metal Gears that I haven't heard too many people talk about. That was from NES or something like that.
Oh, well, I think the second game is famous for a scene where you're crawling up a ladder for a solid 5 minutes, and all you're doing is holding up on the controller or whatever. And like they call that like a really good moment because it lets you like listen to some audio or something. It's just a prolonged Dead Space elevator, though. I don't understand what. I might be wrong about the number, like if it's 1 or 2 or whatever, but it's not 3. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I know there was early Metal Gear before the PlayStation ones, but like I played a little bit of Metal Gear Solid 3. And what I distinctly remembered was just how much consoles and shooters don't mix. Like, the controls just don't work, and how awkward it is to fuck around in that game. But like at the time, I didn't really feel like there was too many cutscenes. They were kind of interesting, but there was a distinct disconnect between like what the developer really felt like they wanted to do and then what they actually did, like with the gameplay. It was really, really bizarre. Like, say for example, this was Snake Eater. You would you would get like leeches or something on you as you're walking around. Like you had this menu to manage your status, like healing or dealing with certain injuries or something like that. They were trying to be realistic and edgy, kind of like the really busted Deliverance Kingdom Come, was it called? That was supposed to be her definition, but was like one of the most profoundly fucked up games in existence.
Oh, is that Kingdom Come Deliver Us from the Coloreds?
Something like that.
It was the game that everybody was raving about because it was set in 1500s Europe or something, and it had no black people.
And then it came out, and it was a disaster.
Oh no, I mean they were attacking it for not having black people in it. That's what I was saying.
Oh yeah, I remember that too.
I didn't know if that was the same game. Is what I was. That's the only reason I know about it.
That is the same game. Okay. But it was like it had a similar system in it where you had to micromanage your health, and okay, like again, simulations. It's not really my cup of tea, but some people play truck simulators, train simulators, stuff like that, and DCS, I think it's called, but they're way too fucking expensive because, well, when they're not burning down animation studios, apparently trained artists have a lot of money to spend. So, yeah, but like it goes into that simulation thing. But in Metal Gear, it was so disconnected from the rest of the game because you spent more time fucking around the menus than anything. It was basically just like upkeep, just for the sake of having upkeep. Because anytime you're wandering around trying to figure out where you were going, I was lost for a long time in the beginning. You're constantly having to like burn off leeches with your cigar or whatever. And anytime you shoot something, there's just infinitely respawning guards. And once you deal with them, you have to, constantly patch yourself up. And it breaks realism right away because you're just like filling yourself with bullet holes and like band-aiding them away constantly. It's just micromanagement for the sake of micromanagement. But in the background of that, you have the more or less cinematic, quote-unquote, experience. So you have really, really awful shooter controls. You have really, really dumb AI and jankiness. And then you have this micromanagement on top of it. And I don't mean micromanagement in the sense of StarCraft. I mean micromanagement in a very, very negative way. This is micromanagement in the sense that you have distilled a part of the game down. I mean, it makes sense from a conceptual standpoint. You get shot and it's a survival game where you're in the wilderness. Maybe there should be some kind of way for you to interact with your damage other than just dealing a potion of healing or a med kit or something like that. Okay. But since we have to flip through so many fucking menus doing this, we start reaching a point where we're no longer talking about playing a game, we're talking about managing chores. And that's what it was. That's why we don't typically do this in games like Doom or Duke, or whatever, because it's really unnecessary. It doesn't actually add anything to the game. At this point, we start thinking about maybe we should focus more on the game aspect than the cinematic experience aspect. Except, like I said, there's a disconnect between what the developer wanted to do and what they actually did. These things they added didn't add to the cinematic experience. It's a lot like StarCraft 2 in the macro mechanics, where Blizzard thought they were adding skill expression because they removed so much elsewhere. They really were just adding more chores. And just like the medical system in Snake Eater, you had to use this system to get through the game. You had to interact with the macro mechanics. It was necessary. Otherwise you were, either going to die or playing really, really suboptimally. If you just ignored Chrono Boost, Larva Injection Mules, all this other annoying, unnecessary shit, you are playing very, very suboptimally. And in neither case, did the developers really actually play their own game and think that system through and think about what does it actually contribute to the game? Because it really doesn't. It doesn't contribute on paper at all. But when you actually play through it and you actually interact with it yourself, you start asking a lot of questions like, why am I doing this? Why am I interacting with this system? What is that actually adding to the game? Do I really feel like I'm surviving in the wilderness, dealing with stuff by constantly using one item to deal with another item over and 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 over again? I mean more than just something you see in a fucking E3 demo that somebody played. I mean actually playing it for hours and messing around. You can sometimes become jaded by something when you've worked with it for, however many months or years. But is really not something that's that complicated to really come in and view things, or have a friend of yours who you know and trust to come in and view things and look at and be like, is this actually worth having in our game? You really should be doing that anyways as a developer, but now you're talking about walking simulators, and they're not even games. Like they like Metal Gear may not be great, but I will not call it not a game. I'll just say it's not just like what I've played is not a very good game. I can't say about the rest of the series, but like it's more of a game than all this shit that we see on Steam that literally doesn't even have actual, like, fucking Last of Us is the worst of them that I've seen so far. Where you're not even playing a game. You're just going through a very shitty rendition of the Neverwinter Nights dialogue system, strapped on a bunch of really crappy low-resolution assets from the 90s, from like a Bubsy 3D or something. And you're just following a bunch of really badly blended together Tumblr memes that even Tumblr people don't think is any good. So why do people praise this junk when it's not even a game? Like, if you wanted to make a movie about lesbians, go make a movie about lesbians. You can do that in Unreal. Why did you have to throw in this fake attempt to interact with something without actually having real interaction, right? Especially when you have the, the time rewind or something like that you can just change things.
Wait, you're talking about Life is Strange. You said The Last of Us, so I was confused.
Honestly, they're the same fucking thing to me after I heard that Last of Us 2 turned it into a lesbian meme again.
Wait.
Last of Us 2 is...
Wait, what?
Last of Us 2, from what I heard, it's about how... I forget. All the names are so forgettable. They all mesh into each other. But yeah, I confused
Life is Strange 2 is... I think it's two gay guys or something. Yeah, of course. They swapped it or something. I don't know.
Last of Us 2 is basically the lolly becomes a lesbian.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So, it's the same fucking thing. Like, okay, so, no, I was talking about Life is Strange, where, like, you do something and then there's no, like, punishment because you can just rewind time.
I was trying to... I used the rewind time mechanic for... Wait, how much of that did you even see? Life is Strange.
Enough to make me sick.
Okay. That game also didn't perform at all, despite not having anything there. That game actually, like, that game not killed my processor, but really ran it. Like, somehow, I think it was just a hardware glitch. Like, it was NVIDIA the way it's meant to be watched, TM, because you can't play that game. But I'm pretty sure there's something like that happening. It was really insane. But Patrick and I were having such a blast killing ourselves that we just couldn't. We just kept going at 10 FPS. So the entire playthrough was at like 10 FPS. I'm pretty sure. But it was pretty good. At some point, it got worse in the later seasons too. The DLC. Anyway,
I gotta ask myself, like, why? Like this is like what I would expect the average Joe to be asking: is why does this stuff even exist? Why does it call itself a game when it isn't?
Well, it's a game because it you move around in it. I don't know.
Oh, okay. I
walking simulator, dude.
Okay. All right. That's a little... I guess it makes sense if you assume that the player is like a quadriplegic or, bedridden or something like that. Like a lot of these Americans are. They're like 800 pounds. They can't get out. And then, yeah, like a walking simulator could be like their version of Euro Truck Simulator, I guess. But you're not really controlling
Get
the
Out,
walking
another
either.
excellent movie.
And like that's always like the most baffling thing to me. Like, it's hard for me to connect to the average Joe who thinks that this stuff is a game.
I was going to segue into that actually, is because we don't have any average Joe people in the server. Like, the closest we get is like we don't have any casuals in the server. Really, we get some people who like bad games, but they admit that they like bad games. Like, they're at least aware enough to realize that they just have a proclivity towards shit. Like, they still know it's shit though. Like, they still identify it as that, and that's fine. Like, really, you
can sexually identify as anything you want.
Exactly. The
including
problem,
shit.
The problem is, dude, shitkin. That's my new otherkin. I identify as the shit that my family throws. Thankfully, I'm not around them anymore.
But you still see it dribbling down the window in your sleep.
Yeah. I had an amazing dream where I had, I actually had some sort of powers to, like, I was supposed to be like Invisible Woman or something from Marvel, or Is that from DC? Fantastic Four. I think that's Marvel. But I was a guy, obviously.
Aren't they the same?
No. They're very different. And nobody can explain how they're different, but they're very different. So
Okay.
So I had this ability to wrap a sphere of invisibility around somebody's head, but then it made their head blow up. But my ability, and again, this is in a dream. So we're raiding some place, and all of the armed guards are just like, they look like police officers from Payday 2. And we're killing them, and they're like running around with pistols, like charging forward with the pistol, like hand outstretched pistol aiming. Like it's like something out of Deus Ex, I guess. And so we're just killing them. But like my ability is on cooldown, even though it's real. Like I don't know how I know I know it's on cooldown because I subconsciously I was like, I can't use that yet. I have to wait. But I didn't. So I was waiting, and then at the end of the time, it was like there were all these like people running around with laptops trying to like erase data because we were raiding them for the data. And I say the other person in my party that I remember anything about, like for one, Superman was with us, by the way. So DC and Marvel had a crossover.
Superman really, really running on the edge now.
Yeah, so Superman was there
fighting cops and destroying data.
He thought we had brought Batman with us, but Batman was a black guy with a roasted face, like had suffered burn victim face or something.
Oh, is he Spawn?
And he
actually, that would be something interesting to talk about, but I'll talk about it after.
Okay, and he pulled his mask off and he said, "I'm not actually Batman." And Superman, like the whole time, this guy's trying to monologue about who he is and what his goal actually is, because Superman's just like really upset at himself that he thought it was Batman, but it wasn't. And he's like, "What the fuck, man? How could I think that that's Batman? I can't believe I really thought you were Batman. What the fuck?" Like he went on for like the entire time that the black Batman, not Batman, talked about who he was. I didn't even catch who he was, but he was saying like, "This is who I am, and this is my backstory, and this is what I'm here for." And like the whole time, Superman's just like really upset at himself that he couldn't figure out it was not Batman. Anyway, Black Batman goes through the portal. Yeah, Superman opens a void portal for me, and I run in, and then I get there and I start.
Great, yeah.
I don't know what it did to me. It made me spin and it made me a little dizzy, and then I woke up. Well, in the dream, I woke up in this other world, and I started popping cop heads with my invisibility power. And then, so don't worry, this is almost over. So again, there's a bunch of people with laptops running around trying to erase data, and they're running around as if they have no concern for their own life. It really reminded me of like an intern. Like an intern would be like running around trying to erase data in this context from Blizzard HQ. They're like, "Erase the StarCraft source code, quick. Pronogo's here to steal it. Quick, erase it." And then like I'm popping their heads and shit as this is happening. And they're like running around me as I'm doing it. Like they're not running away from me. They're not afraid for their own lives. And then at some point, I don't really know when the transition happened, but I sat down and started eating chicken with them. And I was still popping their heads while I was doing it though. So they were just in there eating chicken with me, and I was killing them. But we were having conversations. I was like they were like, "Yeah, this chicken's really good, but wait till you try this dip sauce." And I was like killing people while this other guy was talking. This fat Tony guy was talking to me. And that was a real sick dream. So that was what happened today. Anyway, what's Spawn?
Oh yeah. So a while ago, I was rewatching the American Spawn animation, and that was kind of interesting because I had seen it a while ago, but not in its entirety. So it was really, really strange in a lot of ways because, for one, it was Western, and like I said before, I don't really watch a lot of Western stuff. But there was a lot of things about it that really struck me as just unusual. And so you said roasted black guy, and that is who Spawn is. He's a black special ops guy who got roasted, and then he came back as a servant of hell, basically, because he wanted to see his wife again and stuff like that.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
So,
I played a PS2 game of Spawn. That's my only experience with him.
Yeah, I played I think it was a PS1 side-scroller of it a long time ago.
Oh, no, this game was 3D and terrible. So it's very different.
Well, I remember the PS1 one was pretty terrible, too, actually.
Perfect.
But it was really unusual because actually, like, the voice acting and stuff like that was really, really good for the entire thing. The animation was, of course, very simple. I think it was American, anyways. I'm pretty sure it was American. I mean, it's an American comic, I'm pretty sure, but I'm pretty sure it was American made. But the animation did remind me a lot of Cyber 6, which I think was Japanese in origin. And but what really struck me about the voice acting and stuff like that is, like, I sat back after I watched it because it never was actually finished. It was discontinued. It got really messy towards the end, but the pacing and stuff like that was actually very good in the beginning. And when it was finished, I sat back and I thought, so why hasn't American animation even been comparable to this in years and years and years? Why is it we have Netflix now running the show with their garbage? Why is it HBO is allowed to take stuff like Game of Thrones and just shit all over it? Like, why? What happened to the West? What happened to the West? It's like my big $1 million question is, what happened to the West? Why did things end up the way they did? I'll probably never know. I don't really understand the film or animation industry a lot, but a lot of it definitely has to do with Hollywood. Hollywood just destroys talent. It goes in, it dies, and that's it. And I've heard a lot of really like unsourced but still believable stuff about how Hollywood basically takes talent and chews it up and destroys people. And like, it isn't really surprising because you look at what people idolize, like things like Michael Bay and fucking James Cameron and all these, washed up nobodies. And then you look at what they do with stuff that was once at least somewhat pivotal and successful, like Star Wars, and they just shit all over it left and right. And it's like there's just this giant willful lack of awareness, of education. Like, Star Wars was never anything I gave a shit about. But Stargate was. Stargate was not amazing, but it was a series I liked. And then what they did, if you're familiar, they had a reboot called Stargate Universe. And Stargate Universe, basically, originally Stargate, just as I'm sure a lot of people here know what Stargate is, but I'll quickly summarize it just so everybody is on the same page. Stargate is about, this like an American military firm that uses this interdimensional gateway thing they have to go to different planets and research. And usually you just have like like an enemy of the day kind of thing. There is some overarching plots and stuff that go on, but it's mostly like a villain of the day, villain of the week kind of thing that goes on, and they solve stuff and come out of planets and whatever, and everything's happy. It's sort of like a Star Trek kind of deal. And then we walked into Stargate Atlantis, which was basically the same thing, but a different area and different cast and stuff like that. That one was a lot more messy. But it was acceptable in some regards. I watched it. It was, And then you had, there might have been one I don't remember, but this all originally came off of a movie, actually. This started off of a movie, the original Stargate movie, and then it turned into a series. So then we hit Stargate Universe. So Stargate Universe, basically the concept of Stargate Universe, I think, was that they had discovered a ship from one of the original creator races who made like the Stargates and stuff like that. And then it's been a while since I've seen the pilot or really even a synopsis of it. But basically the whole thing about Stargate, really, like, at its theme was exploring unknown stuff, encountering aliens, fighting aliens, like problem solving, sort of like Star Trek-y explorative stuff like that. And Stargate Universe was going to be interesting because instead of just being in like a military base or an installation or whatever, they were on a ship. So they go to the ship, they get stranded there, a bunch of people die, and then now we have a crew of people who are in a ship they don't understand. It's mostly on autopilot doing its own thing. They have to figure out how to use the Stargate and how to work with the ship and how to survive on it while trying to explore the ship and getting it back functional again. So it's basically like rehashing the same idea in a different setting. Again, it could be really interesting. What do they make the series about instead of exploring planets? They make it about the sex lives of the crew and their various personal relationships that they had with each other prior to arriving. Oh, it was embarrassing. It was fundamentally embarrassing. The cast, like, there was a couple, I can't remember a lot because it really is just that forgettable. I remember some of the cast being all right, but a lot of the cast was absolutely insufferable, and the everything about it was really insufferable as far as direction and stuff was concerned. There was so much edge injected into it and so much sexuality injected into it that really was so unnecessary. I don't think we even see hardly any use of the Stargate or outworld exploration of any actual like significant nature until the second season. I think that towards the second season, they started to realize that their original direction was really stupid. And they started to clean it up a little bit. But then what ends up happening is the season's already canned. Like the show is already canned. They finished the second season. And only at the very end of it do they start having some interesting stuff going on. And then it's already canceled because it was garbage and everybody agreed it was garbage and it just died. But like... this is the thing that like Spawn made me realize is like America wasn't always like it didn't have a lot of complete amazing stuff in it, but there was always like talent in really unexpected areas that could make good stuff. Like Spawn, I actually felt that was really good. Even to this day, it's still held up to my modern standards. It still had good direction and voice acting. It wasn't anything amazing, original, or creative or whatever, but the execution was good. It was solid. And a lot of the voice actors and stuff like that were really, really good. Like the voice actor for Spawn was really on point, really solid. You know, even all the side characters were really good. The way that the choreography and stuff was done was pretty solid. And this was old and low budget. So, like, that's something that was obviously, like, based on a comic, and I really can't think of too many things based on comics that even are remotely acceptable in modern standards. But now you go to Stargate, something that I can't remember how many seasons the first Stargate had, but it was a lot. But it eventually got canned, and they've resolved it in a movie, and that movie was a mess. But, like, Stargate was something that one of the main things that really killed it was the fact that, like, the actors were getting old, and some of them, like, retired or moved on to their own things. What was her name? Amanda Tapping was really, like, one of the critical actresses. And she moved on to run her own TV series that I think was a massive bust. I think it was called Sanctuary or something like that. I remember watching the pilot episode for that and really wasn't convinced at all that this was worth, you know, dropping Stargate over. I don't know, maybe she had her own reasons. I mean, she did play, I think, 11, 12, 13 seasons, plus the movie. So she was there for a long time. So their old cast was, like, dropping out. So, like, obviously, at that point, like, it's lived its lifespan, right? But you have something that was high. Like, this is the StarCraft 2 thing all over again. You have something that was really successful, and they go and throw away everything about it that made it successful, and then they end it with this new venture. But the thing is, with TV shows and stuff like that, a lot of the time, it really is much harder to succeed than games. It's much harder to succeed than games. There's a lot more competition. Firefly is really a big one you hear a lot of people lament about, that they say, oh, Firefly is, it was great. Why did they cancel it? And I remember watching the movie and thinking, this has got to be some of the dumbest shit I've seen in a while.
I have no experience with Firefly, unfortunately, so I can't comment.
The movie was atrocious, and everything about it was really atrocious. And it was just poorly done everywhere. I haven't seen the series. Can't comment, but usually when series fail, there's a good reason for it. Like the Spawn thing, I don't know its story, but if I was to guess, it was probably because Spawn was more of a niche to begin with. It obviously didn't have nearly the presence that Superman and stuff had. But I also think it probably has to do with McFarlane being retarded, because I haven't really heard a lot of McFarlane, but anytime I have heard of him, it's usually because he's done something really tismistic.
Tismtastic.
So it's his business ventures all the time seem to be really awful. Like, I actually tried to buy stuff off of the McFarlane's website, and they had such limited availability on fucking everything. It was like they just didn't want business. That
reminds me of when Mark Todd was angry that he couldn't purchase Hearthstone cards.
Well,
the Blizzard store didn't. Blizzard store wasn't loading. He's like, I'm trying to give the money. Why can't I give the money?
Of all the things you're gonna buy, why would you buy cards for an online-only product?
Well, listen, people rent emoji on Twitch for $5 a month. So,
well, that's a feeling of nausea I didn't think I was going to get today.
Well, that's how that's how subscriptions work, though. How did you not know that? God. Every time you subscribe to a streamer, you're renting their emojis. You rent them for a month or for however long you subscribe for.
Oh my god. But I mean, all this kind of like plays into the same thing. Like, you started talking about like how do you connect with the average Joe, and like the average.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one. Unfortunately, I don't think there is an answer though. Really.
Well, you have to kind of like understand like the kind of background behind stuff. Like, obviously, when we look at these TV examples, I'm looking at stuff that I would consider to generally have high production values, like Spawn, and it doesn't succeed. And then I look at stuff that obviously had very low standards, like Stargate Universe, and that didn't succeed either. But the key thing is that there's a lot more things that fail to succeed in this industry, which isn't even considered a good industry compared to gaming. In gaming, anybody succeeds. Anybody can be successful. And the margin for success is also a lot lower. It's a lot cheaper and a lot less risky to get involved in making a game than it is in making a TV series. If you're making a live action TV series, at the bare minimum, you need a TV space or a place to post it, and you need actors. And that is not as easy as it sounds, because even if it's just a bunch of buddies getting together and somebody with a shitty camera or a phone or something making a something, you've still got to get everybody together. You've still got to get them on a script. Like, it's a lot more involved. It's a lot more actual physical work. But games aren't like that, right? And the audience between games and TVs, they actually don't understand that at all. A lot of people don't realize just how easy it is to make games. That's why you see some people make the budget excuse, because they don't actually understand what goes into making games.
Yeah, or it's beta, or it's early access, or it's a mod, and everything that happened with Black Mesa.
And even then, that's not even correct, because we have the developers themselves saying, we had so much money, we didn't even know what to do with it all. Blizzard's own words. Blizzard themselves, even early into their lifespan, they were literally just handed money they didn't even know how to spend. They were just setting on who knows how much that they themselves, as the developers, didn't even know what to do with. They were just spoon-fed money. Just bucket-fed money, really. Like, the too many people come into game development and the consumption of the product with these ideas, these fantastical ideas, not actually knowing what's going on, which is one of the reasons why I like to make these demonstrations. Because, again, if you break things down to a level that they understand and then show them, then, you get those little cogs going. In my case, it's very easy, because in order for somebody to actually consume my content, they have to have basic internet usage understanding, which I have actually found a frightening number of people don't have. And they have to be able to detach themselves from the instant gratification of just being able to stream something on the fly, which, again, there's been a frightening number of people who are adverse to directly downloading something, even though you're actually wasting more bandwidth and processing power and thrashing your hard drive by using something like YouTube. So, like, you can explain these things, and these people just don't care. They only want convenience. So you've already got that gatekeeping thing going on by using a direct download platform to begin with, which is fantastic. So I definitely have more of attention in terms of that regard. So I'm definitely going to get more people's attention. If they're going to go out of the way to actually download my stuff, they've got a reason to do so, and I've already got their interest in some shape or fashion. Even in a lot of cases, these people don't necessarily agree with anything I have to say. They're here to consume the content one way or another. So you've got that connection going on. That's easier. With something like YouTube, it's much harder. And honestly, I don't think it can be done. You can make a million casts or whatever, but the thing is, people are not going to consume stuff linearly. They're going to jump through things. And whenever you actually look at the analytics that YouTube offers you for videos, you'll find that the vast majority of people don't even watch 10% of a video. Now, I know a lot of it's bot hits and stuff like that, but even if you extrapolate from that, a lot of people do not watch entire videos, even if they're not really that long. And
oh yeah, even the average I think the average view duration for this podcast is probably 30 minutes or something, which is much higher than the average YouTube.
That is higher than what I expect, but
yeah, it's 30 or 36 minutes or something for every podcast that I look at, and I don't even really go looking for that information. It's just the way that they've edited the app that is actually the latest upload. Here's how your latest upload compared to your previous upload. you've
Yeah.
got 31 views and that's 3 more than your normal, blah, 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 or whatever. Like, it's just stupid. But it does show you like viewer retention rates, which I guess are interesting enough. But that's just, I figure that's because people are here because they clicked on this podcast because they already know what it is. So they already have that gatekeeping thing going on. That's the gatekeeping of being a small time YouTuber where nobody knows who the fuck you are, except for people who know who the fuck you are. So it's pretty nice.
Like,
have to deal with less idiots usually.
This is one of those things that's kind of like hard to approach because there's a lot of different factors that go into like putting things on a table for somebody to consume. And the thing that we're putting on the table for them to consume, on the big boys table is like this is how stuff is, and this is, you know, reasons why you should look at things this and that and this and that. People have to actually be willing to like climb up onto the table and actually consume that content. When that's like really like the hardest absolute thing, and that's also something you really don't have a lot of control over. So I don't really know how you plan to approach that in your crow.
We got him, boys.
Your crow pilling expedition, your crow pilling operation, your math printing operation. But
it's pretty much the same thing that you were describing, where you're demonstrating the fallacy in the supposition. Like what I think you're doing is you're playing up on the expectation of the viewer if they don't already know how easy it is to fix something in Sonic 06, for example, or to animate something from scratch that would be better than in Sonic 06. They come in because the average viewer, actually one of the only salient points I think Necron ever made when talking about stuff as far as games go is he said that most people don't assume or don't have the connection that whatever they're looking at was made by a human. And so they don't realize that actually that somebody did get paid, odds are, or maybe they were an unpaid intern or something, but they got paid in theory to make the visual content that you are interfacing with. And so most people don't realize, like, for whatever reason, it's easy to just forget that, I guess. So that's why it doesn't offend them as much, I think, is because they've grown used to that and they desensitize to it and they don't make the connection actively in their head. Yes, somebody was, you know, that made that for their job. That was the caliber of work that they thought was acceptable. They just think that it's a bug or it's, you know, something that, whatever. They literally don't think about it at all, usually, is the problem.
Someone was paid to make it, and someone was paid to oversee it, and someone was paid to okay it, and people were paid to print it. Like, it's crazy. Yeah, but then a lot of people also have these, you know, these unrealistic things that it's hard to make this.
Well, that's the other thing. That's the second component.
Because they have the skills.
Yeah, they were paid. Right? They have the skill. Their skill is more than mine. Their understanding of it is more than mine. So, of course, they, you know, whatever I'm seeing here is it's not because they didn't try at all. It's because despite their best efforts, they still were not able to make something that worked 100% of the time. And usually they're not even thinking that as a critical thing. They're like, oh, that's a shame, instead of that being an indictment of their ability. Because if they're still, even if it was really hard to make something that was really good or just basic functional, which it's not, obviously, it's demonstrably not, in fact.
They would try to hide it.
They would try to hide it. The fact, it doesn't matter. Like, even if it was really difficult, the fact that they are put in a position where they're responsible for that and they are not skilled enough to make it means that you have to call the judgment to put them in control of that and have that be their responsibility. You have to call that judgment into question and say somebody really fucked up in the leadership level to give, you know, this intern the position, this highly skilled worker the position of this, if their high skills were still not high enough to meet the barrier of entry here. But it's even worse than all that, I think, because like basically what you're doing when you're talking about your Sonic 06 example is you're challenging the presupposition of the viewer that, this is like, they come in with this bias in their head that it's difficult to make games, it's difficult to animate, it's difficult to do all this stuff. And so when I see a bug in a game, I can laugh because it's, you know, not what I expect. And that's what humor basically is some sort of change in your expectations versus what you actually get. And so I laugh because of that. But then, you know, looking away from that, I can't really say that it's the fault of the developer necessarily, because, you know, it's hard to make these games. And so you're challenging it's hard to make these games, and you're challenging it's even something that I should pay attention to as well, because again, that's what Necron was saying when he says there's no, you know, people don't really acknowledge that it was made by somebody and okayed by somebody and QA'd by somebody and all this other stuff. And so that all comes full circle when you challenge them with that by showing the problem and then the solution, and the solution is much easier than they thought. And you're not even a guy who's a highly skilled employee of a AAA developer. You're a guy on GameProc.com. So you're not really demonstrating like you don't need a huge industry license. You don't need all this training. You don't need anything that the average Joe probably imagines you need in order to do this. They themselves could do this given an hour of training probably. So it's very obviously a task that could even theoretically be automated in some sense, but it's certainly not a task that needs a lot of manual precision and a lot of time. It's just a task that needs to be done with a bare modicum of thought that you're not going to get out of the average game developer, apparently. And so that's where we get into that issue. So I guess what it comes down to really is what I intend to do with the Crow-Pilled series is just introduce people to that same mechanism that you're doing in your Sonic 06 series. I'm just going to give them they have this preconceived notion, and I'm going to demonstrate that their preconceived notion is incorrect about, it's going to be a little bit more abstract, I guess. It's going to be a little bit more difficult because I have to explain concepts as opposed to being able to purely demonstrate them. But that is in essence, the same concept of what I'm going to do is go through their shit and show,
because it's always the basic shit.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to take a long time to do so, to demonstrate that it's wrong, but it's pretty much, it's more than, like, I'm going to have to find some way to make it stick so that they are able to take away from that the proper take. Like, they're gonna read into it with whatever they're going to read into it. But what I want to communicate efficiently and effectively is that this is more than just localized to a specific example. It's more than just Half-Life that's like this. It's more than just Black Mesa that's like this. It's more than just whatever other games I do in the future that's like this. It's pretty much the whole fucking industry.
I'm gonna take off in it right now, so
right. Yeah,
I'll just leave you with the statement. The stuff that we're talking about is actually really, really simple stuff. I'm not talking about like elaborate programming stuff. I'm talking about literally stuff that you can just walk in and do, like really, really basic. Like, somebody touched something that was really easy and they just shit all over it. Like things that actually take more effort to do wrong than to do right. It's always the really basic fundamentals, and I think that's like a good way to start off with your crow pilling. Serious.
Crow pilling.
So crow pilling. I can't. But yeah, like this is the basics of the basics of the basics, and then then I dial back and talk about stuff like the gameplay elements. But it's always like stuff that's in your face.
Bugs are visual bugs are that's a great way to do it because that's something nobody can argue didn't happen. You have a visual demonstration of it happening. So I could even go back to the fucking whatever those other games are, the Metro games, and do the same thing because they have a lot of problems there. You've even seen screenshots of like people phasing into each other. Like nobody can nobody can argue that that's not happening. So that's a great way to open it up. But thanks for joining me.
All right, yeah, I gotta tap out. So I'll see you guys later. Get crow-pilled.
Get crow-pilled.